So welcome, good morning. As Grace said, my name is Chris Conway. I'm a faculty here in the School of Theology and at the undergraduate level at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's. Thank you to Grace and her team for the invitation to be here today. Thank you to you all for being here as well. Way back last year, Grace invited us to think about this Jubilee year, Pilgrims of Hope, and to frame, if possible, our Theology Day talks around that. And so it's kind of a nice double header, and I think Patty could probably make arrangements for you. But my colleague, Father William Orby, colleague and friend, next week here will be talking about hope. And so if you want to stay or return, I think there'll be an opportunity to do that. But the focus of my talk today will be especially on the pilgrim part of Pilgrims of Hope. The image you see here comes from a pilgrimage that I took in early January down to the Mexican-American Catholic College in San Antonio and then further down to San Juan del Valle. This is the Basilica of Our Lady of San Juan del Valle. And this is the sculpture that greets you as you enter the basilica. And on the front side, as you're walking in, you see an angel. And there's a nice place to rest because pilgrims are often seeking out a refuge and places to rest, right? And then upon entering the basilica and then exiting, you see the other side, right? And here the angel is in fact a pilgrim, and the pilgrim is in fact an angel. And sometimes theologians can get a little bit too up in their head, and I was like, maybe it should kind of be reversed, right? But no, there's a great beauty, I think, in that as one exits the basilica to return to the world, just as one has been greeted and welcomed, one is now charged to greet and welcome the pilgrim and the stranger. The sculpture is by Timothy Schmaltz. Perhaps you're familiar with his works. One of his most famous ones is Homeless Jesus, and sculptures based around corporal works of mercy. There at an installation in a suburb of Virginia at a church, the pastor there received a phone call about 20 minutes after its installation saying, "Do you know you have someone on a bench on your property?" The pastor interpreted as this is someone looking out, right, taking care of. But maybe perhaps if we're a little bit more cynical about it, we might say that something else was going on. To get us started, to get us centered, I wanted to begin with a psalm. This is Psalm 133. It's one of the psalms or songs of ascent, a collection of 15 psalms, Psalm 120 to Psalm 134 in the Hebrew scriptures that are pilgrim songs about going up to Jerusalem. How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. It is if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion. For the Lord bestows his blessing, even life forevermore. The first time I had an opportunity to read this particular psalm in public, I just returned from an intensive Hebrew language camp, about 8 weeks where I was studying the Hebrew language. And I came back to my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky. And I was invited to go participate in the church softball league, right? And one of the charges for participation in the church softball league is that you show up ready to share a verse. This was not relayed to me, but perhaps they think, because I'm off in graduate school studying theology, that I should always be prepared. And so we arrive, and both teams have someone who's going to read a verse. Those who are really ready for this, select something like Philippians 4:15. 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Maybe 2 Timothy 4:7, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith, right? Kind of tied into that athletic thing that we're going to be doing out on the field. Sometimes if you're just caught with the Bible and you have to flip, they go right to John 3:16, right? You've seen a football game, you've seen the sign John 3:16, you're going to read that. Me in my graduate school kind of hubris said, I'm going to read Psalm 133. This was just on the exam. I had to translate it. It was really kind of central to me. And I began, and I recited that opening line, how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. And this is the South. So there's like, yes, how good is that? And then I got to the next couple verses. And those, yes was, huh? What? There's a kind of strangeness to this. There's an unfamiliarity to it, right? And if we were to go to the scripture scholars, they'll tell us that here in this Psalm of Ascent, what we see is that unity lived out in these verses. Hermon's in the north, Zion is in the south, right? So this is a unified kingdom, right? That at times had been fractured and split. Aaron and his beard and the oil running down his beard onto his robes is that priestly representative, right? The temple where all folks are coming together in worship. And I think there's a kind of subtle irony in this psalm too as well. If you've ever had the experience of pilgrimage or of going on a hike, right? You always go up to Jerusalem because Jerusalem is a high place. No matter which direction you're going, you are going up. And perhaps you've had that experience of going up and you continue to go up and you continue to go up. Or if you've been in a car ride with children, they're very well at voicing this. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Certainly parents are probably thinking the same thing, but not voicing it, right? And so this idea of the dew coming down, the oil coming down, as you're walking up that hill, right, to go to Jerusalem, you might feel a little bit stuck in your place at a certain time. Right? Things are coming down and you are going up, and it might not feel like you're quite making it. But there's a promise here, a promise of God's blessing that comes down, a promise of unity and community, right? And that's what the heart of these songs of pilgrimage are about. It's about a foretaste, right? We'll talk a little bit about this idea of liminality, the space in between. That's what Zion is. That's what the temple is, this place between heaven and earth where things get thinner. The separation between heaven and earth dissipates. So to begin, I'm going to frame this around the remarks that Pope Francis made at the beginning of the Jubilee and the closing remarks of Pope Leo at the end. Right. In this Jubilee year, we saw the death of Pope Francis, the election of a new pope, right? Jubilee is our invitation into Kairos time, into holy time, and that was played out, I think, throughout the year. On the handout here, I have a fuller version, which I'll read. I'll lift up a couple parts that are kind of resonant to me, but if you want, you're welcome to circle or to underline things that are that resonate with you as well. So this is from Pope Francis, Spes non confundent, hope does not disappoint. And this is what he writes at the beginning of the Jubilee. The interplay of hope and patience makes us see clearly that the Christian life is a journey, calling for moments of greater intensity, to encourage and sustain hope as the constant companion that guides our steps towards the goal of our encounter with the Lord Jesus. Pilgrimage is, of course, a fundamental element of every Jubilee event. Setting out on a journey is traditionally associated with our human quest for meaning in life. A pilgrimage on foot is a great aid for rediscovering the value of silence, effort, and simplicity of life. In the coming year, Pilgrims of Hope will surely travel the ancient and more modern routes in order to experience the Jubilee to the full. In Rome itself, along with the usual visits to the catacombs and the 7 churches, other itineraries of faith will be proposed, journeying from one country to another as if borders no longer mattered, and passing from one city to another and contemplating the beauty of creation and masterpieces of art, we learn to treasure the richness of different experiences and cultures. And we are inspired to lift up that beauty in prayer to God and thanksgiving for his wondrous works. It's quite a kickoff, quite a send-off to the Jubilee year. For me, two things really stand out in this. The first is that call for journey and for moments of greater intensity, right? Jubilees are moments of interruption. Pilgrimages are moments of interruption. A French sociologist from the 1970s named Georges Friedman says, take flight, even for a moment, so long as it is intense, right? A stepping outside of our comfort zones is the invitation of the Jubilee year. And then the promises that are so central to Pope Francis' papacy, that call for encounter, right? That call for solidarity, a foretaste of the world to come where borders no longer matter, right? That's the pilgrim's journey. Borders no longer matter on this travel. A chance to encounter new people, to see new cultures, to live out a faith that's incarnated in the particularities and the localities of the people of faith, right? And so this is how Pope Francis sent us off into the Jubilee year. Here's Pope Leo closing the holy doors at the end of the Jubilee. And this is also on the handout. I'll read from it, and again, share some passages that really kind of stand out to me. So the holy door of this basilica, which today is the last to be closed, has seen a stream of innumerable men and women, pilgrims of hope, journeying toward the New Jerusalem, the cities whose doors are always open. Who were these men and women? What motivated them? At the end of this Jubilee year, the spiritual searching of our contemporaries, much richer than perhaps we can comprehend, invite us to earnest reflection. Millions of them crossed the threshold of the church. What did they find? What was in their hearts, their questions, their feelings? The ancients referred to homo viator, and indeed all our lives are a journey. The gospel challenges the church not to be afraid of this phenomenon, but to appreciate it and orient it toward God who sustains us. He is a God who can settle, or a God who can unsettle us, because he does not remain firmly in our hands like the idols of silver and gold. Instead, he is alive and life-giving, like the baby whom Mary cradled in her arms and whom the wise men adored. Holy places like cathedrals, basilicas, and shrines, which have become Jubilee pilgrimage destinations, must diffuse the aroma of life, the unforgettable realization that another world has begun. We see how the marketplace can turn human yearnings of seeking, traveling, and beginning again into a mere business. Let us ask ourselves, has the Jubilee taught us to flee from this type of efficiency that reduces everything to a product and human beings to a consumer? After this year, will we be better able to recognize a pilgrim in the visitor, a seeker in the stranger, a neighbor in the foreigner, and fellow travelers in those who are different? Thus, dear brothers and sisters, it is wonderful to become pilgrims of hope. It is wonderful for us to continue to be pilgrims together. The fruitfulness of God continues to amaze us. If we do not reduce our churches to monuments, if our communities are homes, if we stand united and resist that flattery and seduction of those in power, then we will be the generation of a new dawn. Okay. So as the Jubilee comes to a close, and if you've had the experience of going on pilgrimage and know that it ends, but it is also a beginning, right? Pope Leo invites us to reflect and ask ourselves, what did this mean? What did it mean for us? What did it mean us individually? What did it mean for us as a church? What does it mean for us as a world? And he notes here that the ancients talk about the homo viator, the traveling human, right? A part of who we are as a species. And he says the Gospels tell us, do not be afraid of that, right? During the medieval time when pilgrimages were booming, there wasn't so much a fear of this movement, but perhaps maybe a frustration with it. And we can see this if you read some of the medieval commentaries on the rule of St. Benedict, right? You know, in chapter 53 on hospitality, Benedict says, welcome all as Christ. And then in one of these great St. Benedict glosses, he says, you know, by all, I mean, especially the poor and the pilgrim, right? And if you read some of these commentaries, not all of them, but some of these commentaries from the medieval time on chapter 53, I think born from the frustration of so many pilgrims coming to monasteries on their way or perhaps staying there as a kind of visit, they ask themselves, did Benedict really mean all when he says all? I mean, we're kind of being taxed here pretty heavily here. We're kind of running low on resources, right? And so that speaks to the challenge that Benedictine spirituality puts to us. When Benedict says all, he means all, right? Especially the poor and the pilgrim. But also this recognition that, yes, we might have fears about the pilgrim, the stranger in our midst, right? It might be frustrating because resources are tapped. But Pope Leo here reminds us that the gospel has a good word for us on that. So that's the kind of general frame using the beginning of the Jubilee and the end of the Jubilee. And so now, oh, I jumped ahead of myself. I don't know if any of you received this pilgrim passport. Did anyone pick this up if you're in the Diocese of St. Cloud? Yeah, did you stamp it along the way or mark? Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, so this was produced for our diocese in St. Cloud. If you've had the opportunity to go on pilgrimages, then the pilgrim passport is perhaps something that's familiar to you. And this was just a wonderful creative resource that our diocese was able to produce. And it fits so well with the charge that Pope Francis gives at the beginning of the Jubilee. On one side, you have corporal works of mercy, right? On the other side, you have the spiritual works of mercy, right? And in the middle, you have the sacred shrines and sites of Stearns County and kind of the greater central Minnesota area. It was wonderful. The Sisters of St. Benedict and the monks of St. John's gave you a twofer option in hosting a pilgrimage from the chapel, Sacred Heart Chapel, to the Abbey Church. And I know a lot of our students, a lot of our faculty, and a lot of our staff participated in it. But it's a way for those who are unable to go on those ancient or modern routes to also participate in that pilgrim journey. So a little word of warning here. If you've ever seen those old-timey explorer maps, you might have noticed at the margins where the map kind of comes to an end because it's hard to imagine what is beyond. There's a warning that's given. There be dragons, right? Don't go too far or else you might encounter something you're not quite ready for. And so I'm going to offer a little bit of warning when it comes to our conversation today about pilgrims and pilgrimage. And it has to do with maybe some of the connotations that we have and that we bring around this word pilgrim, and about some of the difficulties in definition and in translation. Okay, so first is maybe the connotations. If you've had pilgrim experience, that's kind of like the good baggage that you bring to this word, right? You have the experience of being a pilgrim, someone who has gone on pilgrimage. But some of us in our imagination might default to the idea of the pilgrims that came over on the Mayflower, right? With their buckled hats and their Thanksgiving celebrations. Or if you're a fan of John Wayne, maybe that image comes to mind where he says, "Howdy, Pilgrim," right? And so we might lose a little bit of focus there. The other problem, though, has to do with definition and translation, and the way that pilgrim is used both ways in spiritual texts and in theological writings. So we have the English word pilgrim, and if you were to do its etymological tracing, has its root in the Latin peregrinus, meaning foreigner or stranger. Peregrinari, to travel abroad, to wander, to roam, to be a stranger in a foreign land. And if you wanted to get right to the roots of it, this per and ager, where we get the word agriculture, right? A kind of a going through a field, right? And a lot of the writings in which we find the word pilgrim present, the main way of thinking about it is this experience of being a stranger, of being in exile, of being a stranger in a strange land. But there's also that definition that perhaps is the one that maybe is more familiar to us, is the person who travels to sacred spaces and sacred sites for religious reasons. I tell my undergraduates that all good theology is about tension, right? If you think about Christology, that's tension at its tautest, right? Fully human, fully divine. And when we see those heresies that arise, the tension breaks. We want to emphasize the humanity a little bit more. We want to emphasize the divinity a little bit more. And so one of the tensions I want us to think about today is this tension between these two notions of pilgrim. One is the stranger, and one is the traveler to sacred sites. And I think if we can maintain that first tension, we'll see the depths and riches of the tradition around that. And if you need a little bit of encouragement, the Russian writer Leo Tolstoy tells us that all great stories have either two starts. A man or a woman goes on a journey, or a stranger comes to town. And we had that tension right there, going out on a journey or a stranger coming to town. So if we can maintain that tension, I think that'll be really, really fruitful for us. So I'm someone who studies comparative theology, which brings theology and religious studies together. And this part of the talk will be especially focused on the way in which religious studies might help us think about pilgrimage as a human phenomenon, as an anthropological part of who we are as a species. And if we want to get theological, we can also think about what does this mean then for how we talk and think about God. The first idea I want us to think about is with Rudolf Otto, one of the pioneers of comparative religious studies, and his book called The Idea of the Holy. And Rudolf Otto says here that the holy is a mysterium tremendum et fascinans, a mystery that is awesome, awe-inspiring, in whose presence we tremble, but also enchanting and fascinating. A mystery that's beyond all our knowing and comprehension, in whose presence we stand afraid, but who also calls and beckons us. And if you like the hymn Amazing Grace, I don't know who doesn't like that hymn, right? But you think about that role of grace in this. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, 'twas grace my fear relieved. Right? So that kind of a dual presence in the divine, something that is frightening, overwhelming, but also something that's enchanting and inviting. And from that idea of the holy, we have this notion of hierophany. Phany means kind of like an eruption or an interruption. Hiero here means an eruption of the sacred into the profane. And here we're indebted to the work of Mircea Eliade and his Patterns in Comparative Religion, that notes that human beings as pilgrim species, as a religious species, have these sites, these places that are considered holy. And they go to those places. And this might be the second tension I want us to think about. If the first is that idea of stranger and traveler to sacred spaces and the idea of the pilgrim, this is a second tension when it comes to the understanding of the holy, of the divine, right? Sometimes folks might say, well, why pilgrimage? Why do you need to go on pilgrimage? Don't you know that God is everywhere, that God can be found in all things, that God can hear your prayers no matter where you are, that, as Augustine says, we don't move with our feet, we move with our heart because God is closer to us than we are to ourselves, right? And there's truth to that. That's theological truth, that the universal, the omnipresent is diffuse throughout all of reality. But there's also a kind of grace-filled notion here as well, that the universal, the all-powerful, allows God's self to be present, manifest in the particular, in the local, right? There's a story about someone who has returned from Iona up in Scotland, right? And as they get back to the mainland, Iona's out on an island. They run into a Scottish gardener and is talking about these profound experiences they had there. And the Scottish gardener says, yes, the sky's much thinner there, right? The separation between heaven and earth is much, much closer. And so if we think about this as not just a yes on the part of those who are doing the seeking, but yes on the part of God to be found in these particularly intense sort of ways, that's an important tension, I think, for us to think about. James Vidal says, the ubiquitous presence of the divine may be experienced there more easily, more tangibly, right? Sometimes when it's everywhere, it's hard to notice, right? And so these particular places allow for an intensity and an immediacy that might not otherwise be achievable. And so I'm going to share a few of these with you. And these come across traditions. And one of the reasons for this is so that we can think about how we are pilgrim people and God is a pilgrim God. So this is Mount Kailash. It's in the Tibetan plateau. It's a sacred site for many religious traditions, but most especially the Hindu tradition for those who are devotees of Shiva, the Shaivite tradition. And if we're thinking about hierophany here as expressions of the powerful, right? Mountains do quite a good job of that, right? But the idea of hierophany is that there are many mountains, right? This is the Trans-Himalayan Plateau. There are a lot of mountains there, right? But this one, this mountain in particular, is considered to be sacred and most holy. No one climbs up it. It's not Mount Everest. It's not K2. You're not going to see summits and things like that because this is sacred ground, right? Because it's where Shiva dwells. And so pilgrims will make their way up to Mount Kailash, and part of the pilgrimage is to walk around it. It's 33 miles kind of around the base, right? But the idea here is that amongst all the mountains that one can choose, this one is special because it's the place that God has said, this is where I'll live, and this is where I'll be accessible in the Hindu tradition. This is the Mahabodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, India, a sacred site for Buddhist pilgrims around the world. I like that this is, sometimes folks think that science and theology are at odds with one another, but notice the taxonomy name for the Mahabodhi tree, the Ficus religiosa, right? It's a nice meaning. Science and religion don't necessarily have to be at odds with one another. This is the tree under which the Buddha attained enlightenment, right? If you know the story of the Buddha, he was born to a royal family. His father did not want his son to experience suffering, so pampered him with all the gifts that a royal life could provide. But the Buddha found that unsatisfying. And against his father's best intentions, hopped over the wall of the palace one night, made his way through the streets, and there he saw an elderly person whom age had taken a toll upon. He saw a sick person upon whom disease had taken a toll upon. He saw a dead person, never seen that before in the palace life, right? And then finally he saw a sannyasin or a renunciant, someone who seemed to be able to live a life of equanimity amidst all this suffering. And if you know something about Buddhism, you know that the first of the Four Noble Truths is the idea that existence is marked by suffering, that it has a cause, and because it has a cause, it has a relief, right? And so the Buddha set out in order to find a way to alleviate not just his own suffering, but the suffering of the world. And so according to his story, after living a life of luxury and then living a life of extreme asceticism, the Buddha decides that maybe there's another way. And you notice that in a lot of religious traditions, there's a talk about the way, right? Perhaps there's another way. And so he hits upon the middle path, and it's under this tree that he comes to that realization. This is not the original Mahabodhi tree. It was destroyed. But in the 3rd century, King Ashoka, kind of this famous king in India who was a promoter of interreligious dialogue and tolerance, took a sapling from the original tree and took it to Sri Lanka, where it was planted. And folks consider that to be kind of the first intentional, or the oldest tree that was intentionally planted that we have in existence right now. And the tree that you see here now at the site in Bodh Gaya is a sapling from that tree. And so there's a continuity to tradition. It's not the same tree, but it is the same tree, right? And this is one of the dynamisms of these holy places, the role that memory plays in them. This is the Kaaba in Mecca, where Muslims make pilgrimage every year, right? Around Mount Kailash, they go in a clockwise fashion. Around the Kaaba, it's counterclockwise. It's still a circumambulation, but in a different direction, and they do it 7 times, right? For the Muslim tradition, this is where the Prophet Muhammad cleansed the Kaaba of its idols and said that we will worship the one true God, right? And pilgrims from all over the world, Muslims from all over the world go there. And I have this image. This is Muhammad Ali, the great Louisvillian. Perhaps now maybe the 2nd most famous Louisvillian behind the actress Jennifer Lawrence. But Muhammad Ali has a special place in all Louisvillians' hearts. And this is part of his pilgrimage to Mecca. There's a site connected with a sacred figure. I mean, the last one I'll share with you is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, right? The church built upon, around the tomb of Jesus. A holy site, right? Where things are really thin, as you can imagine, right? And the image on the right is from my friend Kevin Ahern. We were classmates together at Boston College, and the Holy Sepulchre is a especially holy site for him, and he's made frequent pilgrimages there. But during the pandemic, when we were all in lockdown and travel was difficult, he decided to find a new way of doing pilgrimage. And so what he did was he created his own blueprint for making a Lego version of the Holy Sepulchre. You can't buy this set, but he might be able to share it with you, all the different parts and pieces that you have to put together. And he shared with me that the experience of doing that, of building up in a Lego in a playful way, but also in a deeply intentional way. And he said it was one of the things that helped him get through the pandemic. He wasn't able to make the pilgrimage in body, but he kind of was with his hands, right? He could put himself there interiorly in spirit, but also in a different kind of way, be physically, bodily present to place. So I want to provide you just kind of a year in review, right? So we have the Jubilee going on with the centrality of pilgrimage being a really important part uh, um, of that celebration. Uh, for those of you who've done the Camino de Santiago in Spain, right? Reports have come in for the year of 2025, and we know that it's about 530,000 people completed the Camino. Now, a lot more folks walked it or parts of it or took train or bus or car, but this is like the official pilgrim number. In the 1980s, that was 2,500, right? From 10 years ago, this is a 90% increase. So the popularity of pilgrimage is certainly on the rise. And these famous pilgrimage sites like Camino de Santiago reflect that reality. For folks going on Hajj to Mecca, this year was 1.67 million people. That's a significant decline from pre-pandemic numbers, where there was about 6 million or so annually making Hajj. Unrest in the region and things like that have probably brought those numbers down, up from last year, but things seem to be going up. The Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe, 20 million pilgrims visited this year. About 10 to 13 million, numbers are kind of inexact, and what's a few million, right, when it comes to pilgrimage. The majority of those arriving around the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, December 12th, and the festivities that accompany that feast and celebration. We're coming up on the 500th anniversary of the apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and that number 50 million, 60 million, you can imagine how high that number could go for the 500th anniversary. The Jubilee of Pilgrims, Pope Leo said it was innumerable, but we have numbers. It was a lot. 33 million crossed the threshold in Rome. About 8%, 10% came from the United States, right? If you think of your participation through the Pilgrim Passport, that number is a lot higher as well. But these are folks who made the kind of the official pilgrimage to Rome. Father Roger, you were part of it, so we're glad to have you here and your service to that pilgrimage. All right, so 33 million folks participated in that Jubilee. And then this is the big one. This is the Maha Kumbh Mela in India. It was a big year for the Kumbh Mela. They happen every 12 years. This was a 12 by 12 year, so 144 year since the last Maha Kumbh Mela. And 660 million Hindus went to the confluence of the Ganges, the Yamuna, and the Saraswati River over a 45-day period to bathe in the holy waters. 50 million on peak days, right? That's a lot of folks. And I think this in of itself, probably if we were to gather all the numbers together, certainly pushes us past like 10% of the human population participating in pilgrimages in this past year. That's a lot of folks. That's a lot of opportunities for transformation. And so I think what Pope Leo is challenging folks coming out of the Jubilee year is to think about, in what ways have you been transformed? In what ways can you carry this experience onto the next Jubilee in 25 years? There's a lot of time in between, right? So in what ways can that transformation have fruit, not only in the year, but in the years to come? So those are some examples of the phenomenon of pilgrimage. What I'd like to share now are some frameworks that theologians, scholars of religion use when they think about pilgrimage. The first is kind of an extraction on all these different pilgrimage experiences and trying to get at what pilgrimage is at its core. The second example I'll give you, it comes from a theologian where he is trying to imagine what is the ideal pilgrim like, right? What's the ideal pilgrimage like? This comes from David Carrasco from the Harvard Divinity School. And he thinks about pilgrimages as having three stages. The first stage is that of separation, what he considers to be a breaking from the status quo, right? It's an interruption to one's daily life. And when one sets out on pilgrimage, there is a transition that happens, a letting go of one world to step into the other. And this is true of Christian pilgrimage as it's true of pilgrimages in other religious traditions as well. But this idea of stepping outside, of stepping into, leaving behind the chronos time that Pope Leo is talking about with efficiency and consumerism and things like that, and stepping into the kairos time, the grace time that pilgrimages invite and support. The key idea I think here for David Carrasco is this notion of liminality. And it's an encounter that takes place where community is built, or in the language of Raimondo Panikkar, a famous pioneer of interfaith dialogue, especially between Hinduism and Christianity. He tries to capture liminality with this idea of nowhere / now here. Right? This kind of tension between no place and the immediate presence. This is that idea from Iona, right? Where the sky is thin between heaven and earth. It's a space where encounter is possible. Not necessarily because we left the things behind, but because in this new space, everything that we bring with us is somehow transformed. It's an opportunity for community. And David Carrasco talks about the spontaneous community that forms in pilgrimages. And again, if you've had the opportunity to go on a pilgrimage, you know the friends you meet along the way, right? The deep relationships that can be born from the briefest of conversations, right? Someone who travels with you for 15 minutes, or someone who accompanies you for a week, or someone who goes the whole way with you, right? These are spontaneous opportunities for encounter. David Carrasco also talks about the normative community, right? And this is an important part of pilgrimage. I think we like to romanticize the spontaneity of it all and the mystical kinds of experiences that pilgrimages invite and create. But without this normative component, those things probably would not happen, right? These are the folks and the programs that make pilgrimage possible. Those who map the route, right? Those who operate the hostels, those who offer mass, who offer confession, right? They're part of the community, but in a different kind of way than those that you encounter fellow pilgrims along the path. And the last notion of community that David Carrasco speaks about is this idea of an ideological community. And here, folks on pilgrimage are invited to participate not just in the present moment, but with pilgrims and pilgrimages of past. Here we have that idea of memory, right? And if you think about the word to remember, right, in one sense, it's to call back. In another sense, if you think about members of a community, it's an invitation to bring the body back together, right? To remember, to reconstruct, right? And one of the things that David Carrasco is trying to accomplish in this notion of ideological community is the way in which pilgrim traditions and those who participate on them transcend the individual, transcend space and time, and allow for those memories to be held together collectively. Collective memory is a kind of a slippery slope in the fields of sociology and things like that. We can't really remember collectively, but we can, right? I can't remember what you remember. You can't necessarily remember what I remember, but there's a recognition that these memories nonetheless shape and form us, right? And there's a way in which the real dynamism of these pilgrimages and these pilgrim experiences is that it taps into this kairos time. There's an immediacy of the present moment, but that time transcends itself as well. And that's how religious studies scholars can sometimes categorize pilgrimage. Theologians use that kind of language, but expand upon it in light of faith, right? When I talk to my undergrads about theology as faith seeking understanding and methods or approaches to doing theology, sometimes I tell them that to do theology is a lot like making a smoothie. You have a lot of ingredients that go into it. You have scripture, you have tradition, you have philosophy and sciences, the best of human learning. You have experiences of individuals and you have experiences of community. And the task and challenge of the theologian is how do you put those parts together, right? And so for André Brulé, a Jesuit theologian at Boston College, he's taking the best of what scholars of religious studies have to offer, what sociologists have to offer, and brings that in conversation with the Christian tradition. And he presents his understanding of pilgrimage as having 10 core characteristics. And he divides these into three kind of subcategories. The first is what he calls essential conditions, that without which it wouldn't be, right? These are necessary for a pilgrimage to be a pilgrimage. And he talks about this idea of intention, right? In the English, we don't have a word for pilgriming. Pilmigrating might be kind of the closest, but it's awkward, right? We do have words for walking and traveling and journeying, right? And if we want to make it if we want to distinguish what makes pilgrimage and what makes a walk or a travel, right? For Brulé, it's the idea of intention. It's the impetus for one to go and make or take pilgrimage. It's the continuous engine, as he says, that sustains one through pilgrimage. Again, if you've had the opportunity to go on pilgrimage, especially one that's intense, that there's maybe a lot of walking involved, a lot of resources involved, certainly at some point along the way, the idea came to you, I can stop, right? I can hop off the way. I can go back home, right? But Brulé says the intentionality of this journey allows us to meet the intensity of it. It's the thing that we hold on to. It's the interior experience of the pilgrim experience. He also talks about this idea of transcendence, that human beings are moving beings. Human beings are also questing beings. We ask questions. We try to step outside of ourselves to observe the world as it happens. And in the language of St. Augustine, we're restless, right? As he says at the very opening of the Confessions, our hearts are restless until they rest in you. And so there's this need or this itch to move, to seek out, to quest, right? And there's a recognition on the part of the pilgrim that the things of this world will not satisfy that restlessness, right? And so the pilgrim then is the one who is on this quest for the transcendent. And pilgrim sites and shrines and sacred mountains and trees are particularly potent places where the divine, the holy, is made manifest. Sometimes when we think about transcendence, we think about just like up there, out there, right? If I were to ask you where heaven is, you'd point up, maybe. Certainly when I ask my children, right, where's heaven? They point up, right? This kind of over and beyond. But in the language of philosophy and of theology, transcendence is paired with a radical immanence, this presence of the divine. The category of over there or over here is shattered in the idea of transcendence. Sometimes we think transcendence just over there, but it's also here, right? And that's at the heart, that tension is at the heart of the pilgrim experience. And lastly, kind of tying into, in this section on essential, is the notion of memory. And the Pontifical Council for the Pastoral Care of Migrants and Itinerant People say every shrine can be seen as the bearer of a specific message, since it vividly makes present today the foundational event of the past, which still speaks to the heart of pilgrims. I'll talk a little bit about my trip to the Mexican American Catholic College after break. But one of the speakers that met with us, a theologian named Timothy Montavina, who is an expert on the Guadalupe tradition. And he recounts one of his visits to Tepeyac and to the Basilica on the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, December 12th, in which, as part of that program, as part of that celebration, the story of Juan Diego and the apparition of Our Lady is reenacted, right? Before the entire group of pilgrims who are there present, or at least those who are able to make it inside, right? And he tells that how, as the climax of that story is being retold, or as it's being remembered, when Juan Diego throws open his tilma and the image of Our Lady is present there, and the roses come out, and the religious authorities bow and kneel in the presence of Our Lady, that there is a thunderous applause that echoes throughout the basilica. And he says that he thinks certainly part of that is for the children who have put on the performance, right? For the great work that they have done, the care they have taken in telling this story and making it present. But he also says that I think the reason for this thunderous applause is because the pilgrims present there recognize themselves in Juan Diego, right? And when they see religious authorities who have been stifling, making things difficult, right, take a knee, not just to the Blessed Mother, but also to Juan Diego, that dynamic there is in play, they get a taste of something that they hope for and long for as well. That story, that experience transcends time, right, to the immediacy of the now. And the pilgrims are brought into that memory, and it becomes part of their memory, that idea of collective memory. And so for Andre Brulé, these are fundamental key components for doing pilgrimage. He also talks about this idea of geography, right? And we've kind of hit upon this with David Carrasco as well, the idea of separation, of return, right? There is a beginning and there is a destination, right? That stepping out of the ordinary so as then to have experiences of the ordinary or the extraordinary, to go to places where the divine is made manifest here and now. He says it entails movement and journeying where God is ultimately and finally the goal, right? He kind of pushes back against ideas of sacred and profane, where the sacred is a space carved out from the profane or for the secular. He much prefers, much prefers the language of holiness. They think because things are holy in the way in which they participate in God's holiness, right? And so this idea of destination is not only to holy places, but for Brulé to God as the ultimate telos. He speaks of the experiences on the road as well. He talks about experiences of embodiment, the movement of the pilgrim's body through space, through the practices that the pilgrim undertakes while on pilgrimage, the experience of being present to relics, right, to the bodies of saints and holy persons as well. And for him, this centrality of embodiment can be a pushback against what Charles Taylor calls excarnation. That there's a temptation, I think, especially in the West, to try to leave our bodies behind. If you've heard interviews with Peter Thiel talking about the future of AI and things like that, a lot of that future doesn't entail bodies, right? Bodies can be embarrassing, right? Bodies are limiting, but they're fundamental to the experience of what it means to be human, but also fundamental to the pilgrim experience as well. It is only through our bodies that we experience what we experience. Through our senses that we encounter that which is beyond our senses, right? Because God allows God's self to be manifest and accessible in this way. And so it's a pushback against temptations to get stuck in the mind, or maybe and sometimes in the Christian tradition, there's a devaluing of the place of the body. But the body is important. It has a central role. We're a tradition that confesses the resurrection of the body. The in-between time, as we wait for that resurrection, our souls long for a body because they're incomplete without it. And there's a way in which pilgrimage brings the body to the fore, whether it's blisters on the feet or a delicious meal in the company of others, right? Body is front and center in the experience. There's experiences of vulnerability, right, on the way. A condition, an openness, a consequence of being on unfamiliar terrain opens one to encounters. If you've been a traveler, if you've been on pilgrimage, you know your reliance upon other people. There's a kind of radical individualism in the West who says, let's go this our own, right? Let's do this by ourselves. And pilgrimages shatter that idea that you can do this on your own. You won't make it 20 miles if you're trying to do this by yourself. You have to allow others to help you. And in that experience of receiving help, you in turn have to be ready to offer that help back, right? The awareness of our embodiment makes us aware of our vulnerability and the dependence of others. It requires effort, right? If the journey is effortless, the achievement is unnoticeable, so the saying goes. Pilgrimages require great effort, financial, physical, affective. These are emotional experiences. They stir up things spiritually. They take time. Whether you're doing it for a weekend, you're doing it for a week, if you're doing it for a month, if you're doing it for a year, it takes time. to go on pilgrimage. It requires effort, and there are fruits to that effort. And it requires alterity, the experience of otherness, experiencing others and experiencing oneself as others. One thinks about those in this experience of departure or of separation, those that one has left behind. They are called to memory quite often. Those who have gone ahead, they're called to memory quite often. And the experience of being in community with folks that are different from you, that speak different languages, that like different kinds of foods, right? This was what Pope Francis was talking about as the blessings or opportunities of pilgrimage, the encounter with the other. The divine likes plurality. How do we know that? Pentecost. It wasn't an erasure of language, it was a celebration of language, a celebration of culture, a celebration of particularity, right? And pilgrimage allows us to encounter the other, but to also experience ourselves as other as well. Maybe you've heard the story of the two young fish that are swimming along the way, and an older fish swims by and says, "Hey, how's the water?" The two fish swim by a little bit further and say, "What's water?" I haven't had the experience of it, right? Never experienced something other. This is one of the powerful legacies of the pilgrim tradition, is allow us to experience what we always experience in new ways. It has the possibility of otherizing it for us, to make it new, to make it special, to make it holy. And then last is the question of transformation. This question mark is not my question mark. It's the question mark that Andre Brulé leaves behind. Because there is a departure, there's an experience, there's a destination, then there's an end. One cannot go on pilgrimage forever. If you're familiar with the Ignatian exercises, which is kind of like a spiritual pilgrimage that one takes, Ignatius says a month, maybe a couple of extra days, depending on who you are, but you're done. You have to go back to the world, right? And so there's an end to this experience. And that's a good thing. But the question is, in what ways do these experiences transform individuals? And sometimes the knock against pilgrimage is that when it's undertaken, there's not much transformation that happens, right? And the goal that Andre Brulé has here is for us to think about, well, what are the things that are necessary to ensure, or best ensure, that transformation can take place? If you leave with an intention that you're doing this, right, and recognize that you are doing this, and you're questing after something that's greater for you, if you're participating in a memory that's not only yours, but of others, if you're aware of your body, if you're aware of your vulnerability, if you're aware of the effort that it's entailing and your otherness, right, and you're able to kind of hold that all, which is a lot to hold, right? He says that there's opportunities of real transformation here. Yes. Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, yeah. Mm, yes. Yeah, fantastic for that. For those of you who are at home who might not be able to, were they able to hear it? Okay. Oh, okay. For those of you at home, the comment was on the Buddhist monks who are making their peace walk from Texas to Washington, D.C. And the recognition that there's impact for the monks who are doing that, but then also for the communities that they encounter along the way. Is that a fair? Yes. You were spiritually, yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I think I mean, that's a really fantastic insight that you're sharing there. And you're probably maybe keeping up with how Aloka, the wonder pup, was doing, their doggy companion along the way, who was sidelined a bit for injury. The name Aloka in Pali means light, but in Sanskrit it can also mean a kind of to a place or from no place, Aloka. So while it's a Buddhist tradition that kind of tying into this idea that this name means light, I kind of also like that play of to a place but from no place. But yeah, one of the great gifts of pilgrims is the way that they invite participation from afar, the way that they move through communities, and sometimes, as we saw in the example of the commentaries on the hospitality from the rule of Benedict, can kind of interrupt things in an inconvenient way, but can also interrupt things in a very powerful way as well. And in the Buddhist tradition, one of the roles of monks is to be a person or a community to whom one can make gifts to, right? And so they have a karmic role in the cycle of rebirth and transmigration, right? To be present to the community, not to live apart in monasteries up on hillsides that are difficult to reach to. But yeah, this sense that through their meditation on peace, and as they carry that and they're walking, there's a way that that peace invites folks to participate in it. But I think also in the Buddhist tradition, I think we could see this in the Christian tradition as well, that peace radiates out as well. One of the famous stories of the Buddha is there's a village that's beset by a marauding elephant that's in rut and just knocking everything over, and it's causing a lot of havoc. And the Buddha comes and enters the village, and the marauding elephant in rut takes notice of the Buddha and charges at the Buddha. Sorry, microphone. Charges at the Buddha. And just about as the elephant's going to knock the Buddha over, it stops. And it places its trunk on the head of the Buddha. Maybe legend, who knows if this actually happened or not. But there's an idea here that the Buddha, who radiates compassion out into the world, not just for human beings, but for all beings, that equanimity, that peace transforms the surrounding area as well. And if you're familiar with the story of Francis and the wolf, right, something similar kind of happens there as well. And I'm sure you've had the opportunity to be present in the presence of holy persons, right? Whether they're saints or saints to be, or just the folks in our community who have that kind of aura, as the kids say today, that vibe about them, right? Who's in presence brings you peace. So yeah, this idea of the Buddhist monks, that's fantastic. Thank you for drawing that to our attention. And we'll see, hopefully there'll be fruits of that transformation as well. I think there will be. Yeah. So we are approaching break. I can tell you that. We will have break soon. But I want to touch briefly about this idea that we'll circle back to at the end. And that's that notion of pilgrim or pilgriming in the tradition in Scripture, right? I've asked you to try to hold in tension this idea of pilgrim as the stranger, but as also the person who makes these journeys to sacred sites. Because both these are operative in the tradition, both these are operative in Scripture. And so from the Hebrew Scriptures, one way of thinking about this language of pilgrimage is through the story of Adam and Eve, almost kind of like a anti-pilgrimage of sorts, of expulsion, of exile that marks the human condition, right? And here really is that idea of being a stranger in a strange land, right? Entering into a world other than one's own. The figure of Abraham, the father of faith, but also the father of pilgrims, who's called to leave his homeland, the house of his father, to go to a land that is promised, right? There, both dimensions are at work. To leave to set off to a strange place, but to leave to set off to a place that's been promised, to been set aside, that's been made holy, right? So the story of Adam and Eve, the story of Abraham, these inform the tradition's way of thinking about pilgrimage and pilgrimage. The experience of the Exodus, right? From captivity and slavery to liberation to the years of wandering in the desert, 40 years, right? A generation, including Moses, does not enter the land that had been promised, right? Of freedom, but of exile, of wandering, right? This is a really rich image as the tradition thinks about what pilgrimage entails. And those years of wandering, of kind of getting lost along the way, the love and support that God shows the Hebrews, despite their backsliding at times, the gift of manna from heaven, right? The idea that in this wilderness experience, the relationship, that covenantal relationship with God, is now firmly established, where God says, I will be your God and you will be my people, as a kind of preparation for entering into the land that's promised. The idea of the temple in Jerusalem, as we've seen in the Psalms of Ascent, right? Prior to the construction of the temple, God was present in the tabernacle, in the tent. God went where the people went. God was present there, right? In the construction of the temple and in the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum, God has a place where God resides. There's a centralizing effect to this, but it also allows for focus and intentionality in ways that perhaps weren't available before. And then this idea of exile and return. The first destruction of the temple, the Babylonian captivity, a longing to return to Zion. That powerful psalm, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept as we remembered Zion. How can we sing these songs in a strange land, right? That experience again of captivity, of being strangers. How that informs the obligation to one's neighbor, to the stranger. Be kind to the stranger, love the stranger, for you too are a stranger in a strange land, right? That experience of pilgrimage in that way. In the New Testament, we see that Jesus was a pilgrim. Jesus, as a first century Palestinian Jew from Galilee, the Gospel of Luke, we hear that Jesus and his family went to the temple every year for the festival of Passover. Right? The only story we get about Jesus as a teenager is that time in which Jesus is left behind at the temple. And we hear that Mary and Joseph get a day's journey before realizing it. And if you're a parent like I am, that's a helpful way of putting parenting in perspective. But if the Holy Family went a day without noticing the absence of Jesus, I'm sure it's okay in the grocery store if I lose track of my child, right? Or the movement in the Passion narrative, how it coincides, how it commingles, how it commemorates the Passover event as well. We get this wonderful passage in Mark in which Jesus, accompanied by the disciples, arrive in Jerusalem, and these disciples from Galilee, from the backwaters, what good comes out of Nazareth, right, are astonished at the buildings. They maybe weren't like Jesus going to the temple every year for festivities and seeing these buildings and this great city of Jerusalem. They're kind of overwhelmed by it. And so this idea of Jesus as a pilgrim who's experienced pilgrimages and in that religious context of Jewish faith. But then also this idea of Jesus as the pilgrim God, as the word that is made flesh and dwells amongst us. That language of dwelling in the Greek is that idea of tabernacling, right? The divine presence made immediate here. Here's again one of those nice tensions between temple and tabernacle, right, that we see here. The Word becomes flesh, the very stuff of reality. No higher hierophany in the tradition than that, right? This idea of kenosis, of pouring out, God willingly taking on human form, fully human, fully divine, diffuse of maximal divine attributes, completely vulnerable, right? To no pain, to no suffering, to no abandonment. This is all part of that pilgrim experience of God. One of my professors, James Keenan, talks about this idea of mercy. And he says, mercy is the willingness to enter into the chaos of another. And you think about those passports of the corporal works of mercy, of the spiritual works of mercy, right? That idea of willingly entering in the chaos of another. No greater sign, no greater symbol, no greater manifestation than that of the incarnation. God's self entering into this chaos we call life, right? It's powerful. And that's at the heart of the pilgrim experience of God. And the tradition, we can talk about the rich, long, and sometimes controversial tradition of pilgrimages, of those who went out to the desert to encounter the divine, to escape from the distractions of the world. You know, we hear that soon the desert became a city. Escape from the world, and soon the world comes and follows you. And some of our earliest stories of pilgrimages are those folks who go out and seek the wisdom of the desert fathers and the desert mothers. People who are living these odd kinds of lives. Surely they have good words to say. Surely they figured something out. The idea of going to Jerusalem and St. Helena, the mother of Constantine, kind of re-energizing Jerusalem as a central pilgrimage site. The controversies around going to Jerusalem. Let's not forget our local places as well. You don't really have to go to Jerusalem to experience those things. Sure, it's great to walk in the footsteps of where Jesus walked, but you don't have to. There's a kind of tension that develops as pilgrimage to Jerusalem really takes hold. The idea of going out in popular pilgrimage devotions to local places, to encounter local communities. And then also the way in which the pilgrim's journey is mapped interiorly through spiritual practices. One of the scholars, Iget Bauman, on pilgrimages and spiritual practices, it's kind of a little bit of a knock on Protestants maybe, who sometimes have suspicious views of pilgrimage and its place in religious life. But talking about that great work, the Pilgrim's Progress, right? The journey of the pilgrim, and that story is an allegory of life. You know, talks about only the Protestant could make pilgrimage possible from the chair, right? But this idea of turning within, that's at the hallmark of a lot of these spiritual exercises, taking those intentions, those experiences of travel, and turning within so as one can have that experience of ascent to the divine. And then the last thing I'll say before we go on break is this notion of the pilgrim church. This is an idea that really takes hold during the Second Vatican Council. And the way in which the church understands its relationship to the world changes. Prior to this, the idea was the church triumphant, or the church militant, the church over and against the world, right? But this idea of a church as pilgrim, I think, necessarily needs to hold in tension that idea of being one who's on a way, but also one who's a stranger in a strange land. The idea has its roots in Augustine, his idea of the city of God and the city of heaven. And here it very much is that experience of exile, of being a stranger in a strange land, and the challenge that the church faces, the city of God faces in the light of the city of man. It's sometimes an antagonistic relationship, right? But I think one of the geniuses of the way in which this notion of the pilgrim church is employed in the Second Vatican Council is it takes that reality seriously of being a stranger, but then pairs it with an intention, a destination, right? An openness, a vulnerability that accompanies what it means to be a pilgrim. This is not church triumphant. This is not church dominant. This is church opened and poured out, right? And this is one of the kind of great lasting legacies of the Second Vatican Council, that the church can imagine itself in this way, to experience what it's like to be a stranger, and so to be sympathetic to experiences of strangers, of aliens in our midst, but also to be a people on the move, not to be static, but to be ready and able to respond to the signs of the time and the call of the Spirit. In this final part, I have kind of two main sections and then kind of a short coda. But just hearing from folks who've come up to me and just kind of hearing the energy in the room, I do want to set up some time at the end for you all to share, not just ask questions, but I know a lot of folks have experience in this, and experience leads to expertise as well. And so I would love to hear from folks, whether it's questions or your own experiences that you'd like to share. And so I want to make sure that we carve out some good space for that as well. And for folks online, please do consider asking questions as well. We have ways to ensure that your voices and contributions are heard as well. So I want to share two pilgrimage experiences that I've had in the last 10 years or so. One is as an observer, as someone who studies pilgrimage or a particular pilgrimage in a particular tradition. And so not a pilgrim myself, though that notion of liminality does have a way of pulling and pushing for sure. And the second is one that I took recently as a pilgrim to San Antonio and then down to the border through the School of Theology with our partnership with the Mexican American Catholic College. And I'm going to be using Andre Brulet's framework to help kind of tease those out a little bit. And then I'll end with a coda, and I'll hand it over to you all with your comments and your questions. So the first is an experience of pilgrimage as an observer. The image you have before you is a little town in India called Pandharpur. It's about 4 or 5 hours by bus, depending on how fast your bus driver is and how many stops you need to make, outside of Pune, which is one of the large cities in the state of Maharashtra, India, on the west coast of India, the state where we have Mumbai or Bombay, right? And during my first year here at the School of Theology and the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University, I had just finished my Ph.D. work. I had written a dissertation on comparative theology. So this process of faith seeking understanding, where one of our ingredients for our smoothie is the truth, beauty, holiness, goodness present in other religious traditions. And my focus had been on Hinduism. I had spent a lot of time with a Hindu reformer named Swami Vivekananda, who had his own kind of pilgrimage tour of India that had profound impact on his understanding of Hinduism and its responsibility towards social justice and social uplift, his ideas of service. And the other focus of the dissertation was a field emerging in India called Dalit theology. Dalits are folks who come from communities formerly known as untouchable or outcast. The name Dalit is the name that they have given themselves that speaks both to their condition. It's a past passive participle of the verb dal, to like grind or to push down. And so they speak about their experience and taking that name as a group that's oppressed, it's a group that's ground down, and it's not their fault. And the caste system at times, that notion of karma, it was conceived that through previous life's faults, one finds themselves in that position. And they were making very clear by taking that name and the verbal form that it is, that they are not responsible for their condition. And it was one focused on liberation as well. And at the heart of the movement was a literary movement, an aesthetic movement, centered on poetry and the way that poetry can interrupt the conventions of the status quo, can give voice to dreams and aspirations that are otherwise difficult to communicate. Think of the language of the prophets, of those who dream dreams, and the fact that many of the prophets in our scriptural tradition are themselves poets, right? And so a poet has this ability to not only dream the dream, but then write it in a way that can move hearts and minds. And in the course of doing that study, I came upon a figure from the 13th century named Chocomela. And within the Dalit poetry community, Chocomela was a kind of controversial figure. He himself was from the Dalit community, and he was a person who did not reject his Hindu faith, as many Dalits in the 20th century had, whether it's through mass conversions to Christianity or to Buddhism. A lot of folks in the movement admired him because his poetry was pathos-filled. So much pain in Choka's poetry. So much experiences of oppression and calling out to a God. But in Choka's case, a God who was very present and very immediate to that. And so there's this tension as Choka is kind of lifted up as the first of the Dalit poets, but maybe not quite the revolutionary figure that some of the more revolutionary figures in the Dalit movement had hoped to be. And so as you're kind of transitioning from having written a dissertation and now thinking about, I have to keep writing if I want to keep working. I was looking for a project, and Chocomela just seemed like the perfect fit. Through generous funding from the school and the School of Theology, I was able to go to India for about a month. I had a few places that I wanted to go. I wanted to go to Nagaland in northeast India. It's kind of a part that hangs over Bangladesh. Nagaland is 90% American Baptist because of missionaries there. So it's a dry state, can't buy beer. You can accidentally become a bootlegger like I did when I visited my friend not knowing, but not arrested. But it's a dry state. And so I really wanted to go visit my good friend Ponger, who I hadn't seen since our days of kind of earlier graduate study. And I also wanted to go to Shantivanam, Bede Griffiths and Swami Abhishektananda's ashram in Tamil Nadu in South India. And so that was a kind of a pilgrimage in of itself that I was able to do. Those were two figures very much influenced by the Hindu tradition, the wisdom and the practices therein. And so I had these kind of three legs to my journey. I did make it to Shantivanam. I quickly learned that most folks don't go there in July, which is when I went. They come in December because it's like 105 degrees in South India in July. No air conditioning, a nice fan though. But I did have the opportunity to be there for the Feast of St. Benedict, and we got ice cream. And it was the best ice cream I ever had. It's a sacramental experience. But in between, I had this opportunity to go to Pandharpur, and the trip was really based upon the timing of being able to go to Pandharpur during the height of the major pilgrimage festival. The devotees in this tradition are called Wakari. War means to be pilgrims, and Kari means to take or make pilgrimage. So the very name of this community and their devotion is completely centered around pilgrimage. And at the heart of it is this group of poet saints that all came together to write various songs and poems to a particular manifestation of the god Vishnu, of the god Krishna, named Vitoba or Vitala. And through this love and devotion, they were able to cross caste lines and class lines to form a kind of beloved community that transcended the ways in which society in 13th century southwestern India was demarcated, as if borders, didn't exist, right? They were able to accomplish that. And so this gives you a sense of who these folks are and their background and the role that God has in their lives, Vitoba Vitala. So God baked pots with gora, drove cattle with choka, cut grass with sabata, wove garments with kabir, colored hide with rohidas, sold meat with the butcher sajana, melted gold with nahari, carried cow dung with janabi, and even became a pariah messenger for Damaji, right? So in the caste system, a lot is centered around occupation, and to the degree in which that occupation is either sacred or profane. Is it holy or is it polluting, right? And in this story, we have a cast of characters from different stratifications, right? But you notice at the heart of this poem is the idea that God is present and alongside those who are doing their daily tasks, right? The jobs that society has enjoined to them. And a lot of these tasks are low caste or outcast occupations, ones that would be considered ritually polluting, right? But here God has no problem partaking in that because God wants to be accessible and present to those that love God because God loves them. And so I wanted to be a part of this pilgrimage as an observer. This wasn't my tradition. I knew that the attention that I set out with would not be the attention that someone from the Wakari community set out with. But I did go with the hope of having a greater knowledge and appreciation for the rhythms of the pilgrimage, the way in which these folks from 700 years ago still animate a very vibrant faith life community. And so I arrived in Pune in anticipation of going to Pandapur, this 4 or 5 hour bus ride. When I check into the hotel, I tell the concierge, my hopes of what I'm anticipating to doing. And he says, "Do you want a car?" It's like, oh, I don't know. Doesn't seem very pilgrimy to get a car. And he's like, "No, I think you want a car." And I was like, "Oh, I appreciate this. It's a very nice offer that you're having. But can you just point me in the direction of the bus station?" He's like, "Okay, but just so you know, there's going to be like 500,000 people there. I don't know if you want to go by yourself. And if you go by yourself, take a car." I was like, "That's a very generous offer, but I kind of want to have this experience as an observer, but like observer participant, right?" And so I get to the bus station and, I see these buses and they got AC, they have chairs that recline. And I go and I say, "I'd like a ticket to Pandharpur, please." And they point to a long line of school buses. And I kind of look, I'm like, "It's going to be 4 or 5 hours to Pandharpur. I'm going to be on a school bus." I'm like, "What about one of those?" And they're like, no. Those aren't for pilgrims." Oh, okay, I'm passing here. Okay, I'll take one of those. How much does it cost? And they say, "It's free. You just hop on." And I wasn't quite ready to hop on yet. Because one of the concerns I had is like, where am I going to stay? And so I was like, well, I'll try to coincide it so that my trip to Pandharpur kind of happens in the evening. So I can sleep on the bus and I can get there and it'll be morning time. And as you can see, I got there at morning time. This is sunrise in Pandharpur. And so I come back to the bus station at about midnight and I get pointed to where the buses are lining up. And as soon as a bus is filled up, it goes, and another bus comes, and that bus gets filled up in about 10 minutes, and it goes, and there's buses coming back and kind of going forth. And I'm like, in that kind of moment of vulnerability, I say to myself, Am I going to do this? Like, I'm going to do this. And I get on. And kind of a sense of awareness of body, of embodiment, of being an embodied being. I'm not really built for school buses. I don't fit in them very well. And I was fortunate that I had a very lovely neighbor named Ramdas Chavan. This is him there. We were bus mates. We were seat mates. We sat side by side to one another. And he was very accommodating to my size and helping me feel comfortable and things like that. And when we arrived, I didn't have much of a plan because unlike others taking the pilgrimage, that kind of idea of the normative community that comes, that directs you and things like that, I was there to observe, but not necessarily to participate. But Ramdas Chavan says, no, you're going to come with me. He's like, my brothers are here, folks from my village are here, come, have a meal with me. It's like, okay. And so I do. And he takes me to where his folks and his family and his community are set up. Because one of the amazing things about this pilgrimage, if we're thinking about it in the idea of collective memory, of remembering, is that Pandharpur is the temple town that all these different saints are associated with. But they're not from there. They're from the neighboring villages. And so in this Wakari movement, what happens is that the images of these different poet saints are put onto palanquins, onto carts, and they are brought by the pilgrims to the temple to where their God is. And so it's a pilgrimage for the pilgrims, but it's also a pilgrimage for these images, these murtis of the saints. And so all these different saints that I showed you, Gora and Kabir and Chokamela, right, from their towns, they're being brought to the village, or they're being brought to Pandharpur for this big festivity. And along the way, they're singing the songs of the saints and things like that. And it's a really jovial kind of atmosphere. So anyway, I had this meal with Ramdas and his family, and he says, come with me, I'll walk you through. And we'll go on this pilgrimage together. And at this point, I'm kind of feeling the liminality of the space here. And I'm an observer, but now it's kind of feeling a bit like I'm also a participant, right? Because of Ramdas's charity and his hospitality. But we get to a point where we've been together for a couple of hours, and I thought we'd go right to the temple, but no, there's a normative community here, and there are certain spots and stops along the way, right? There's a pilgrimage within a pilgrimage that happens. And Ramdas and his brother are leading me. He's the one who took the photo, Ramdas's brother. And we get to the point where we're at the banks of the river where our day had started. And you can see this photo. I look pretty tired, kind of sweaty. But this is the moment where I knew that I was an observer and not a pilgrim. And when I look at it, you might not be able to see it in my face, but when I look at this picture, I can kind of see it in my face, that realization. Because what happens here is that we're going to cross the river in a boat. And the bus was okay. I made it. It was bumpy. It was uncomfortable. It was hot. But, pilgrims do what pilgrims do. But here we were going to all load into a boat. And just as the buses were getting stuffed, these boats were getting stuffed. And there are lots of people. And that vulnerability, that sense of embodiment, I said, no, I'm sorry. I don't feel comfortable getting in this boat and crossing it. I was afraid what would happen if it would capsize and things like that. I'd just been married, had a child on the way. All these kinds of things were flooding into my mind. And I kind of had an out because I was an observer, not a pilgrim. My intention was different. And so this is the place where Ramdas and I separated ways. But still, when I look at this picture, there's that kind of, I see it in my face, this tension or this pull between really wanting to get on that boat and crossing, but then also feeling sort of the pull of the world upon me. And I have here on the handout one of the poems associated with Chokamela and this pilgrimage site. And so I'll read it here to you. A surrounding wall was built around Manglaveda. So messengers were sent to bring the Mahars, which is the community Chocomela is from. Chocomela went with the other Mahars and he began to work on it. While working, Choka was singing the name of Vitala, the name of the god, ceaselessly remembering Govind again and again. 4 months passed this way when suddenly the wall collapsed. A number of Mahars were crushed under it, and Chocomela offered his last breath to God. Said God, O Nama, who is Chocomela's friend, you should go over there and bring back Chocomela's bones here. Said Nama, O God, how am I to recognize them? Replied God, pick only those bones which give out the name of Vitala. God said, Choka is my very life, the heart of my heart. He is the deity of my family. How great was his devotion, how great his spiritual strength. It was for his sake that I had assumed a visible form. They who meditate on my Choka, I will protect from all dangers. So Namdev brought back the bones after testing them, and Shakrapini, the name of the deity, Vitala, Govind, took them into the field, into the fold of his yellow garment. From God's garment, then a loud sound arose. The name Vitala was resounding up to the sky. A number of saints carrying their flags came rushing to listen to that resounding noise. On the 13th of the dark half of Vaisakha, a Friday, someone had just mentioned that it was Friday the 13th. I did not put that together. This is in May, though, not February. The sounding of the name was heard at the Great Gate. In such a way did Chocomela enter Samadhi at the Great Gate. Through the bliss of the resounding name, the Eternal performed the burial with his own hands and placed the stone over his tomb. And this is the tomb of Chocomela here on the right. And you can kind of see it here. If you see the building that has the dome on top of it, there's a little building kind of out in front of it. That's the tomb of Choka. And because he comes from the Dalit community, he's not allowed access to the temple. There are stories in his hagiography in which he goes anyway because God invites him, because obviously God loves Choka very much, right? And so there's this sense that in his death, he remains outside the temple. But it's a reminder to those who go into it of the way that things were, but perhaps the way things ought not to be, at least in the eyes of God. Because here, what Vitala says to Choka is, you are the deity of my family. You're my chosen deity. The roles are reversed here, right? And so for these communities, the way in which Vitala, this form of Vishnu, undermines the rigidity of the system and makes God self-manifest to the community is the reason why folks year after year after year gather up the saints from their villages, come together singing their songs, because in this particular form of the deity, they recognize a God who loves them, not despite of their circumstances in life, but because of it, right? A God that participates in their occupations, a God that's willing to bury a dead devotee regardless of the ritual purity of it intact. And so while I was not able to have a true pilgrim experience here in Pandapur, the kindness, the generosity of Ramdas and his community gave me an insight into the tradition that otherwise I could not have had. And so I'm grateful to the school for giving me the opportunity to go, but especially to Ramdas for the opportunity. The other I'll share with you is a pilgrimage I recently took to San Antonio, to the Mexican American Catholic College, and then down to the border there in Southeast Texas. The School of Theology in the last 5 years or so has developed a wonderful partnership with the Mexican American Catholic College. It's an opportunity for students there to come here and study, whether it's in person or online. It's an opportunity for our students to go there and to study. And it's an opportunity for gifts to be exchanged, talents and resources shared. And so one of the intentions I had for making this trip is that I really wanted to honor that relationship. I've seen the kind of fruits that it has brought to our community. And one of the hopes that I had was by going in my role or as capacity as a faculty member, that I could do honor and respect to that relationship. So that was one intention that I had in going. The other was that beginning in the summer, I had this kind of stirring taking place within me that said, kind of responding to the signs of the time and the experiences of the strangers in our midst, the trials and tribulations that immigrant communities in our society are facing. And I was thinking, how can I better equip myself as a person, as a teacher, as a member of society? And so I was like, this seems like a wonderful opportunity. I've heard great things from the students that had gone before. The school, Daniela Jupan-Jerome, and the wonderful grant we received from the Lilly Foundation had funding. So some of the effort was relieved, at least financially for me. And so I asked her, would you ever consider letting faculty go? And she's like, yeah, I think we could do that. And I was like, fantastic. Is it okay if I go? And she said, yeah, I think that could work. And we kind of left it at there. And then in November, I returned. I said, I'm really, really thinking about this. This would be a good idea. Is it okay if I go? And she said, yes. And so the School of Theology made all the preparations for me. I joined a group of students and some folks from the community, and we set out together from St. John's Abbey at 5 in the morning on a little bit more comfortable bus, and then we flew down to San Antonio together. The students, I think, were perhaps better prepared in that they looked ahead at what this experience would entail. I knew we would be going to the border, which was kind of one of the reasons why I really wanted to go. I knew that we would meet with social service agencies that were serving clients in the region, and that was another reason why I wanted to go. What I did not pay attention to was the fact that there was going to be 36 hours of class over the 10 days that we were there. Because this was part of a class program for our students. We were joined by folks from St. Meinrad's seminary. They're seminarians in formation. We were joined by a group of propaedeutics. And I must confess, I did not know what a propaedeutic was prior to this. It's new language for young seminarians who aren't yet going to seminary. It's kind of a year for formation and maturation. So we were joined by a group of propaedeutics from San Antonio in Texas and San Bernardino in California. And we had this great, lovely group that I was not anticipating. Nor was I anticipating the coursework, which was a lot, but wonderful. We learned things about how do you navigate intercultural contexts. And we were given a nice image of an iceberg, because if you're navigating, you got to be cautious, right, when it comes to iceberg. Thinking about culture, the things that you can see above the ice, like traditions and customs and songs and foods and dress and things like that. And then things that are below the ice that might not be immediately observable, like conceptions of time, of family, of responsibility, right? What is most important, like worldview shaping kinds of things. So we had classes on that. We had classes on Hispanic ministry in the 21st century, the growing and changing demographics of the church in the United States. We had classes that asked us to think about our positionality in our communities, the power and privileges that we possess, and how those can be fluid and those can be dynamic. We learned about Marian devotions and had all sorts of great kinds of conversations and things like that. And in fact, I brought, it's not like my pilgrim certificate, but this is proof. I felt like I had to bring this back to my fellow faculty that showed that I completed the academic part of the training. And it was really fantastic. It gave us an opportunity to learn new contexts, to frame our experiences, and to have conversations with one another. These were folks that, I had sat at these tables with at Convivium. And so some I knew by name, others I only knew by face. But by the time we left, we were like a real community. And it was an amazing kind of transformational thing, not just with the folks that came from the School of Theology, but also these young propaedeutics and seminarians that we met along the way. In the midst of our studies, they broke it up, which I was grateful for. In the midst of our studies, we had an opportunity to go a little bit further south to San Juan del Valle in the Archdiocese of Brownsville. And this kind of trip within a trip was, I think, for a lot of us, like the pilgrim experience of it. We had the preparation, we were given some tools and some language and some knowledge, right? And now we are ready to go into this place, into this world. And when we arrived at the Basilica, we were staying at the Basilica Hotel. We met with the priest who was in charge of the facilities. And he was giving us a history of San Juan del Valle, its relationship to Our Lady of San Juan de los Lagos, about maybe like 100 miles or so in Mexico, and how these ladies were paired with one another in the devotional traditions, connected as if there were no borders, right? This powerful devotion and that emerged around Our Lady of San Juan de Valle. And one of the things he was saying in that talk is, he was inviting us into the pilgrimage experience. And he said, if you look at the numbers of the national shrines in the United States, we're number 2. The shrine in Washington, D.C. is number 1. But he said, a lot of the folks that go there are tourists. Everyone who comes here is a pilgrim. And so as you enter into the Basilica, I encourage you to think of yourself as a pilgrim, to imagine yourself as a pilgrim. And when you have the opportunity to stand beneath the image of Our Lady de San Juan, don't only look at her, but allow her to look at you. And for someone who studies comparative theology, like, alarm bells are going off, because that's precisely how in the Hindu tradition one thinks about the experience of seeing the divine image. It's called darshan, of seeing, but also this experience of being seen. And so I was like, wow, this is an amazing kind of parallel. And the fact that he's calling us to this intentionality of really shifting the mindset away from being a tourist who looks and observes, and maybe even kind of gawks, right, to a deeper kind of presence that allows one to see, but then also to be seen. In the evening, we kind of we shared a meal together. We went out for a lovely Tex-Mex meal. It was a long day, the first day of visiting various agencies who do amazing work in supporting their clients down there. We heard harrowing stories of folks who migrated, crossed over into the United States. Trauma, kind of beyond trauma, but who nevertheless said for what they've seen their children and their grandchildren accomplish, they would experience it all over again. So it was like a real heavy experience, a real human experience, a real vulnerable experience for those who were sharing with us. One of the women who shared her story was her first time ever sharing her story to a group. And you could see both the pain, but the power that she possessed as she was telling that, making that story her own, and then sharing it with the community. And we gathered at the end of the night, kind of all together. The young propaedeutics went up to be loud on their floor. I kind of felt like the old person, it's like, turn the music down, So it didn't seem like we were going to be able to sleep with a bunch of 18, 19-year-olds running around up there. And so I went downstairs and had my kind of like Canterbury Tales moment there. It was myself, one of our MDiv students was there, our bus driver was there, Sister Maria Elena, who was kind of programming everything, was there, and also on the couch, we're kind of all sitting next to each other, kind of side by side on these different couches, was the leader of the mariachi band that would be playing 7 masses on Sunday. And we were all watching Mexican football, Mexican soccer on television. There was a language barrier there, for sure. My Spanish is not good enough to hold up for most conversations, but just kind of being in the presence with one another from all different walks of life, but being centered here, kind of grounded here, was just an experience of community that I didn't imagine that I would have on the trip like that. And at the end, we were able to go down to the border, to the wall. This is our whole group here. I'm kind of in the back. Father William's also in the back right. So encourage you again to go out to his talk on hope next week. And this was kind of the terminus of our trip, in that we couldn't go any further, right? We were at the wall. There was no going beyond. This was the frontera. This was the boundary line, right? And as we were leading up to the trip, I kind of kept reflecting upon what would this experience be like to go here, right? To go to this place where so much memory, that so many experiences, so many memories, right? So much trauma. What would it be like for me to go there? And I was trying to imagine it. And then you arrive there, and you see the wall, and you're like kind of shocked by what it looks like. It's not aesthetically appealing at all, right? It's kind of rusted over. You can kind of see through it. One of the propaedeutics, as we were walking along the wall, we walked along it for about a mile or so. He's like, have you noticed we haven't heard any birds? No birds singing. It's kind of like a dead space, right? This land in between, this kind of frontera between two worlds or two places. And we had the opportunity to go back and to reflect upon our experiences there. This place in which the sacred and profane are really commingling aside one another, right? And as an academic, as we were leaving, I was looking in the Basilica bookstore to see, like what sort of resources they had. And sure enough, they had a spiritual guide for pilgrims to the Basilica. And this is the final kind of prayer offering that's given to the pilgrim upon leaving. So I'll share this out of coda, and then we can open it up to questions. So it says, Dear Pilgrim, your journey to the Basilica of Our Lady of San Juan de Valle has been a gift of grace. Here you have prayed, entrusted your intentions, and been welcomed by Mary, who presented you to Jesus with a mother's love. You have received comfort, hope, and strength to continue your path. Here, Mary offers consolation, walks with those who weep, and sustains them in their sorrow. Here she presents each of us before her Son. She becomes a companion on the journey for all who lift their eyes in faith, convinced that their prayers will be heard. The Virgin responds with the tenderness of her gaze, a gaze that touches the depths of the heart and renews our hope. This experience is what makes this place a spiritual refuge that pilgrims long to return to. Now the time comes to return home. to your family, to your responsibilities, to the daily life, but do not return the same. You carry with you the peace you have received, the hope renewed, the certainty that God walks beside you. Let what you lived in this sanctuary become a light for others. Right? And so a call for the experience, even though that comes to an end, for it to be a transformative experience. And for me, I was greatly indebted to my wife, who allowed me to go for what turned to be like a 12-day trip, leaving behind our 3 young girls, to allow me to sort of separate, to step outside of my ordinary, to enter into this kind of holy space and time. And because of that, I felt like a real responsibility to find ways to carry this experience, not only with myself, and to share it. And so when I hit upon the idea of doing Pilgrims of Hope, thanks to Grace for directing me in that way, I thought this is an opportunity to share that experience, to acknowledge the stories that I heard, to be present to them, to share the good work that this partnership with the Mexican American Catholic College and the School of Theology is undertaking, and to be mindful as a pilgrim who has traveled to a sacred site, to be mindful also of the pilgrim who is the stranger in our midst. And maybe the last thing I'll say is I'll quote Father Gregory Boyle. I don't know if he's a name that you've heard of before. He's a founder of Homeboy Industries. This comes from his work, Tattoos on the Heart. He's heavily involved with gang rehabilitation, drug rehabilitation, helping folks transition from prison back into society. And towards the end of his book, Tattoos on the Heart, he offers this reflection on kinship. He says, inching ourselves closer to creating a community of kinship such that God might recognize it. Soon we imagine with God the circle of compassion. Then we imagine no one standing outside of that circle, moving ourselves closer to the margins so that the margins themselves will be erased. We stand there with those whose dignity has been denied. We locate ourselves with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. At the edges, we join the easily despised and the readily left out. We stand with the demonized so the demonizing will stop. We situate ourselves right next to the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. Right? And so this idea that the journey continues, even though the journey ends. It's the idea of inching closer, moving to the margins, so that the margins then are erased. Because once we're at the margins are no more, right? It's as if borders did not exist. I am so grateful for your time this morning, appreciative of you being here. I want to open up space to you all for comments, for questions. I know many of you have had pilgrimage experiences yourself. So if you want to share those and the experiences you've had, I think we'll all be better for it. So thank you all so much for being here, and I'll take comments or questions now. Thank you. And I think Grace has a microphone.
Chris, what we also have at this time, we have a large part of our U.S. Catholic Church, and it's growing with the wonderful Latino, Hispanic population. Is there been a recent kind of guesstimate on what that is? It's not just on the southern border. It's right here in central Minnesota.
That's right. Yeah, it's been a vivifying presence to the communities. Oh, sorry. There was a hand. Is it insight into this? Yeah. Tony.
I think one of pilgrimage we can all make every Sunday is when we're walking into church. Most of you are never going to go to India nor to the border. However, a Mexican immigrant told me that he was going to Mass on Sunday, and next to him was walking another man, and he wanted to say hello to him, but he wasn't sure he could say hello to him. He felt maybe the other person might not hear him. He felt maybe the other person might think that he wasn't good enough for him. He might hold himself aloof from him. I think we believers have to get over those feelings, and we have to make a little pilgrimage, get out of our routines,
Yes, yes.
start realizing that we have something greater than who's competing with each other. We live in a very aggressive society. Our capitalistic society has become very extreme. I'm a Republican, but I haven't voted for the Republicans for about 50 years because they got too much money. And that money has turned their minds around. I don't like voting for the Democrats either. I do vote for them, but they also have too much money. We got to recognize what's separating us. And this is a pilgrimage, I say.
Yeah.
My brother invited somebody, some Mexicans, to his house to have supper. They told me, we were fishing suckers that day by Mille Lacs Lake. And those Mexicans told me two great things happened to them that day. I said, well, okay, we give you the suckers. What's the second thing? I've been here 13 years, and the first time a white person invited me to their house.
Yeah.
I think we got to start recognizing what our culture has done to us. We're like that frog in the pail of water.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Tell them that story.
About where the heat is turned up, is that unaware that it's getting hotter and harder until it's too late? Yeah, I think that's a very important insight. And sometimes as I'm trying to communicate the connection between theology and ethics with the undergraduates, I talk about the two great commands, right? The first is to love God and to love neighbor and to love oneself, right? And I say that in English, we're kind of coming up short when it comes to the word love. It can mean so many things, right? I love Louisville basketball. I love pizza. I love my wife, right? It has so much meaning that it almost becomes meaningless. And so one of the ways I like to gloss it is from the philosopher Cornel West, who says, justice is what love looks like in public, and tenderness is what love feels like in private. And the example you share right there is that experience of tenderness, of truly loving the neighbor, right, in an immediate kind of way. The other commandment, I say, and the undergraduates tell me that it appears 365 times. I think that's just like a TikTok thing, maybe social media thing. I haven't counted it myself, so I can't completely rule it out, but it does appear a lot. And that's do not be afraid, right? We hear that over and over again. If the positive command is to love, then the negative command, the thou shalt not, is to do not be afraid. And I think your example is a really powerful one, because for those of us who are, have power or for privilege, it can be easy not to do these things. It can be easy to succumb to the fears of how will someone respond to it. But to show that hospitality, to open one's door, to share suckers. I don't know what suckers are. I'm from the South, but I assume fishing related or? Oh, okay. Share your pickles with a friend. It's like a kind of a breaking of bread there. So yeah, thank you thank you for that.
Yeah, all I wanted to say was when you were at the Basilica and you were reminded not only to see, but that you were being seen, that is our icon experience, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Now, when we look at an icon, to recognize that we are being gazed at. And the second one is I was on pilgrimage in Israel, and we'd been up in the Galilean area for a week, and then we were headed towards Jerusalem, went through Jericho, saw a lot of buildings that had been bulldozed. We were going up to Jerusalem, and when I looked up, you could see this wall snaking across. And somebody at the time, this was quite a long time ago, 20 some odd years ago, said, "Oh, well, we would never do that in the United States."
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And on the note on the icon, a phenomenon happened in the Soviet Union where either icons were destroyed or confiscated, but some of them found their ways to the national museums and things like that. And it kind of startled those in charge, the way in which folks would kind of do a pilgrimage to the National Museum in order to have that experience, that iconic experience of not only seeing the art, but then also being seen as well. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Oh, yes, hello.
During the Jubilee year, I decided what I was going to do is I was going to try to visit all the holy sites that were in the diocese.
Yes.
And then I decided that I was going to go to Mass at various churches throughout the diocese. And it was a very interesting experience because a lot of the smaller rural parishes, the congregations are made up primarily of elderly people. And how they approached the Mass. And then in the larger parishes, which were much more diverse, it was different as well.
Yeah.
And so that was fascinating to see that. And one of the things I was able to do, especially in November, is that so many of the parishes had books of remembrance. And so I was able to write down the names of the people whom I love or lost.
Yes.
And that was a very profoundly moving experience for me to go and be able to do that in various places.
Yes.
And it was a very interesting spiritual practice to be able to do that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, and I think that was the bishop's choice was to go visit, I think, at least one other church in the area of your Catholic community. And so you visited multiple. Oh, wow. Yeah. That's an undertaking. That's a pilgrimage. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, yes.
I was thinking about, hold it closer. I was thinking about coming out here today, and that is like a pilgrimage for me. It's intentional, there's community, it's transformative. And I was talking to somebody earlier during the break, and we were talking about this, and she said, I work out here, but when I come out here for a day like this, it's different. And, like my radio's not on, and so, there's quietness in the car. So it may not seem like it's a pilgrimage, but in some way, it feels like it is.
Yeah. If it feels that way, then it probably it probably is. It's not a 3-month-long trek, but it provides a place for peace and for reflection and hopefully for transformation as well. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, everybody. My wife and I were fortunate enough. We spent a month in Greece about 2 springs ago, and we didn't go just for pilgrimage, but we did 2 things that are very interesting. The first one we did is we went to Mars Hill in Athens, and this is where Paul preached to the Athenians, largely unsuccessfully. You'll notice there is no letter to the Athenians in the New Testament. And it really struck us. We were on this hill, Mars Hill, and up here above, here is the Acropolis, beaming down, and here is your little hill you can go and preach the message. That was kind of an interesting dichotomy as we were standing there. Then the other one we did, and we even read places that said, "Oh, this isn't worth visiting. Don't bother." We went to Corinth, and really interesting. And they've still got supposedly they've still got the foundation of the prison where Paul was held and released. But I would recommend either of those places if you ever get a chance to go there. And then we've lived in this area 25 years. We've made numerous pilgrimages to this campus. and we're only 5 miles away. So
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. And to do a plug for, I don't know if Dr. Micah Keel has another Theology Day coming up in the spring, but he might have one recorded. Did you go to that one? Chiseling Gods, yeah, in Corinth. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yes, is this thing on? Wonderful. Yeah. Was again pilgrimage. Yeah. Pilgrimages are a great way to understanding God and his will.
Yes.
In fact, there is a pilgrimage happening right here in Minnesota, not too far from here actually, for a holy nun. Her name is Sister Anella Zervis. People have traveled across many states to come to her grave and ask for her intercession, and there's over 50 Vatican-approved miracles associated with her. And it's being processed at the Vatican right now, and she's a servant of God. And actually, I plan on going there after this, actually, to ask for her help in these trying times. And from the spring to fall, there is a monthly prayer gathering at her gravesite for her canonization and prayer for the whole world. And I recommend you go there. It's in St. Joseph and St. Ben Cemetery.
Okay. Thank you for that, and thank you for the invitation.
There are two things that I have experienced. One, living in California for 40 years. And I went to a seminar at one time, and they pointed out that the speaker looked at me and he said, "You are a minority here." And he said, "In fact, you're a minority twice." And he said, "There are more Hispanics than there are Caucasians here, and you are a woman." And I really thought about that, about how do I feel about being a minority? And it was really a wake-up call for me. And my husband is Spanish, was Spanish, and so I really loved the Hispanic community, even though they were Mexicans rather than Spanish. We would always kid about that with my husband. The other thing is, my granddaughter is half Turkish. Her mother lives in Turkey. My son and she split, but she wanted to go back to see her mother, and she was only 15. And we, with all that was going on in our country, we didn't want to take a chance of her going alone. So my father raised me to be very conscientious of money, spending money and things like that. My husband was always willing to do whatever.
Sure.
So it was a leap of faith. But we went to a travel agent, and I thought, well, he was thinking of, well, we could go here and we could go up in these kite planes and things like that. Well, he's got heart condition. And I thought that didn't sound very practical. And then I thought, we could go to Ephesus. And I just got so excited, and I looked it up on YouTube and got information and went to our travel person, and she said, "You did really good homework." And I had guides that could meet us and everything. But I will say, it is the first time that I've experienced the joy of walking on the earth where the Romans were, St. John went, where Mary was, to touch the buildings, to see what they had lived in. And I mean, it was an experience like no other experience I've ever been through. And I thought, it's changed my life, as my viewpoint towards our faith and the commonality of the people. It was a beautiful experience and worth every penny.
What a wonderful story. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Did you end up doing the kite? Okay. Thank you.
Every Armistice Day in the St. Cloud Diocese, there's a small pilgrimage from Freeport to Albany, it's
Mm.
only 6 miles. We pray in Albany, in Freeport, remembering Sister Adelaide Ketter, who was a martyr. She gave her life because she loved Jesus so much.
Mm.
And then we pray for northwest wind also. makes walking a lot better. Armistice Day, we don't use the other word anymore because we're against killing. And then we get to Albany, and in Albany, we remember Father John Kaiser, who gave his life. He loved the Lord a whole lot also. So I enjoy inviting you all on Armistice Day. Deacon Jim Schultz-Suttenberg is leading it. He does an excellent job. They carry a cross, they pray the rosary and stuff like that, and they pray at each place. Yep, please come. Oh, excuse me. Oh.
Thanks for sharing that, because at times I've only lived in Minnesota for 10 years. And so at times I kind of feel like a stranger in a strange land, and it's great to learn about all these happenings. So thank you so much for sharing.
About 10 come.
Okay. Suckers? Will there be suckers? Will there be suckers?
Sucker, pass up.
Okay.
Don't demonize anything that's living. God has made it good.
Thank you.
I'm former pastor of that blessed city of Freeport and parish.
Congratulations. Our shrine is right next to the church.
Okay, thank you.
Last summer, Abbot Doug asked, he alerted me to the fact that these millions of people going to Rome for a pilgrimage. An important part of that pilgrimage was the celebration of the sacrament of reconciliation as one way of restoring any feeling of separation, distance from God. And so hearing those confessions 2.5 hours a day were just very moving experiences of people who were told, take a look at yourself. What things about yourself don't you love? What are they, and why are they there? And what you can do to change them. And there were very moving confessions as part of this. They didn't come all this distance to confess missing morning and evening prayers. And those holy doors really not only welcomed you, but also they were your exit. Go through those doors out being transformed by the experience. And I had a transformation or pilgrimage within a pilgrimage, because I went to the tomb of St. Paul, at St. Paul outside the walls, and I heard those confessions in that basilica. And along the line, after about 2 months or so, I developed a serious infection in my feet. And by the time they identified the bacteria that caused it, it was too late to save my leg. And so I ended up, I left my heart in San Francisco. I left my leg in Rome. And sometimes, they say pilgrimages cost you an arm and a leg. I got a discount. It only cost me a leg.
Clergy discount.
Right. Another aspect too of hearing those confessions is it was broader than just Catholics. I had a lady come, and I'm not breaking the seal of confession when I say she told me, I'm not here to go to confession. I'm Buddhist. And I just want to know and understand, what is it you're doing here? Because I'm going and trying to find out what other religions have as their spirituality. And we had a wonderful conversation.
Oh, fantastic.
Okay. So other people also are making decisions like that. So my transformation ended up, I really enter a new form of life with now being a handicapped person. And I find I had been trying to help people with through my whole priesthood, but now I have to get used to accepting
Yeah.
lots of help
Yeah.
from other people. So I always appreciate that. But it's a great ongoing transformation for this pilgrimage.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
One last one. Anybody else?
I'll be around for lunch as well. So.
My family, we were invited to come to, there's a trailer court outside of Cold Spring. It's like southeast corner.
Mhm.
And we were invited to pray the rosary with them. And so I thought, yeah, why not go? It was on a Friday evening at 6 p.m. and there were not too many white people there, but I just felt welcomed. It was so just wonderful. Every other decade was either Spanish or English. And then we had a little refreshments after. So it was very beautiful. And
Yeah.
this small pilgrimage going on for rosary pilgrimage. So I just felt included. I didn't feel, like most of the people, like I said, were Hispanic or Latinos. I'm not sure what they call themselves, but yeah, I just felt welcomed, and that I would go again, and I'd invite you people come to whenever they have that,
Yeah.
if you can find out about it.
Thank you. Thank you.